All right, welcome to class 5. We're going to talk a little bit about inflation, and we're going to talk about aggregate supply and demand. I know we had a warm-up for inflation last time, so you know a little bit about it. We're going to explore that a little bit more, and then get to the exciting ways which we can think about inflation as it hurts or helps our economic growth. And we're going to put that information into our discussion of aggregate supply and demand, which is going to be a chance to build on business cycles and economic growth and how increases in those 4 components, consumer spending, investment, government spending, net exports, how that fuels our economy. So let me close this door. Inflation, how the government measures price level. I mentioned this idea of a basket of market goods last time, but I think I just mentioned it. We'll talk more specifically about it. How we do a little math on computing inflation. Won't be anything scary or complicated. And then we'll talk about the consequences and causes of inflation. And then that's going to lead into the next chapter, how that relates to economic growth. So let's do it. Inflation. All right, an increase in the general average price level of goods and services in the economy. So you made $30,000 in 1994, 1995, you still made the same $30,000. Well, you couldn't buy as much because there was an increase in the general average price level of goods and services in the economy. Contrast that with deflation, which is the opposite. Prices go down. Now, this has only happened a few times in recent history. It happened during the Great Depression, and it happened ever so briefly in a specific way during the Great Recession. Yes, question?
Sorry, would the glut in the oil prices be deflation or no?
Like
in a specific commodity?
Okay, well, the prices of a good can go up and down, and that's fine based on supply and demand. Inflation, deflation is the whole economy, all goods and services. And we measure that with what we'll see, just this basket of goods. So if the price of that typical basket of goods goes down, we call it deflation. If it goes up, we call it inflation. But good question, Luke. If a specific commodity goes up and down, we don't necessarily equate that to inflation. All right,
Do we know why it happens?
Why inflation happens? Yeah.
People just say, want to charge more.
Yes, we know why inflation. Absolutely. We're going to talk about all those reasons why when consumers start spending more, prices go up. Typically, when we just see a little bit of economic growth, we see prices go up. When we have full employment, we have a little bit of inflation, and we consider that good. All right, everyone's working, everyone's spending, prices are going up modestly, and that's great. In terms of more specific than that, we'll talk about cost push inflation, and we'll talk about demand pull inflation. So two reasons why, and we'll discuss both those. The way we measure inflation is this consumer price index. This is a basket of goods. Has anyone heard of this consumer price index before? You must have heard it 1,000 times on CNN or some sort of money show. It just might go in one year out the other. But in any case, this is an index that measures changes in the average prices of consumer goods. The Bureau of Labor Statistics of the Department of Labor bases on monthly surveys, and they record an average price for a market basket of different items purchased by a typical urban family. So they've decided what is a typical urban family spending, and how can we use that to measure the average increase or average decrease in the cost of living. This basket has a good chunk of housing that's important to consumers. transportation, food, insurance, healthcare, entertainment, apparel, education. The Bureau of Labor Statistics will look at the price of some quantity of education. They'll say, well, how much more is this than that slice of education was a year ago? And then they'll say the basket of goods has gone up this much, and that's our consumer price index. Typical consumer, what typical consumer has, needs, and uses. All right, to calculate inflation, I think we talked about a base year last time. There's just one point in time where we'll say this is our base year. And so if we want to say 1989 is our base year, that's when inflation is, that's when we're going to anchor our calculations. And in 1999, prices are a little bit higher. Wait a minute. No, so I said 1988. What did I say? 1988 was the base year. So 1989, prices would be a little higher. 1987, prices would be a little lower. And 1988 would be our 100. Our consumer price index would be 100 at that base year. So don't get confused if you see anything that looks funny. Why is it less than that year or more than that year? It's just some arbitrary anchor, some base year to calculate inflation. All right, so given that we have a base year, calculate this consumer price index. We're going to find the cost of market basket of goods, products at current year prices. All right, we're going to divide that by whatever we decide our base year is, and the cost of market basket of products at that year. And then to make the CPI look the way we want it, we'll multiply by 100. So in the base year, we had the base year, and we would look at the base year prices would be the same as the current year prices because we would be in the base year, so that would be 1. We multiply that by 100, and we'll say the CPI in the base year is 100. And the CPI in years before that, assuming we're in a mild inflation environment, would be a little less than 100. 98, 95, 92. Go down a little bit as you decrease in years, and as you go forward in years, the CPI would increase. Let's see if we can get to I'll just skip right ahead to alright, this is not going to work. Okay. Yeah, that plan's not going to work. I wanted to just show you a visual consumer price index level. Anyway, so it'll be some variation of 100. 100 in the base year, a little bit less in the years before, a little bit more in the years after. So let me go back to... Okay. So, once we have our consumer price index, so we have the basket of goods in 1988 cost us, say, $100. That same basket of goods in 1992 cost us $111. Say there's been 11% inflation from 1988 to 1992. And we can calculate that inflation rate with an understandable formula. If we want to know the rate of inflation, we take the consumer price index in a given year. All right, we subtract off the consumer price index in the previous year, and we divide that by the previous year. So we have just a change over original formula. So previous year would be, say, 1988. Current year would be, say, 1992. What's the change from 1992 to 1988? Say it's $11 in this basket of goods. Divide that by whatever the CPI was in 1988. Suppose that's the base year. Suppose it's 100. 11 divided by 100, 0.11. Multiply that by 100, and we get the rate of inflation at 11%. Make sense so far? All right. Let's look at an example that the textbook takes us through. So I'm not just throwing numbers and formulas at you. So we look at products in 1982. In this basket, this simplified basket, we've got hamburgers, we've got gasoline, and we've got jeans. And we're looking at the price of hamburgers, the price of gasoline, the price of jeans. 50 hamburgers, 250 units of gasoline, 2 units of jeans. All right, the total cost for this basket of goods in 1982, $245. And then we go 14 years later, 1996. Those hamburgers used to be 50 cents. Now they used to be 80 cents. Now they're $1. I said hamburgers haven't gone up very much, really. And does that surprise you? Like hamburgers in 1982 were 80 cents. In 1996 were only $1. I don't know. Maybe just a staple of society that just didn't. Yeah, ground beef just kind of stayed similar. All right, and then gallons of gasoline. Gas went up from 70 cents to 90 cents. And then a pair of jeans, 1982. Those acid washed jeans. Wait, no. Is that acid washed in 1982? Or is acid washed more like the early 90s, late 80s? I don't know. All right, so you've got like maybe the stone white jeans in 1982. In 1996, just a little sparkle of acid wash for $30. Doubled. So the price of jeans doubled in 14 years. Add up the price of that market basket of goods, you get $335. So we take the we're calculating the CPI. All right, this is a CPI calculation. It's not the rate of inflation. So we take the current year, which is now 1996, divided by the base year, which was 82, multiply that by 100, and we get the CPI is 136.7. So if we were to put this on a graph and say we have CPI on the vertical axis, what we'll do later, all right, we'll do like CPI, and we'll look at GDP. GDP. That's not right. GDP. Okay, if we're looking at sort of how GDP grows in comparison to the CPI, we would have points. We would have 100 for our base year of 1982, and I guess this isn't really going to make sense because I'm not giving you anything that's related to time. So I'm sorry, abandon that exercise. Apologize for that. It's just that we have the CPI in 82. It's going to be our base of 100. In 1996, 136. Calculation for a CPI. And I think there is one calculation like this on your quiz for this week. Just calculate the CPI and turn around, calculate the rate of inflation. All right. So let's actually do that. How would we calculate then the rate of inflation from 1996, or from 1982 to 1986? So we've got the CPI in 82 is 100, and we've got the CPI in 96 is 136.7. So how do we calculate the rate of inflation over those 14 years?
100 is the base year, right?
Yes.
1982.
Yes. You can just flip back to the formula, right? It's just a change over original formula times 100.
136.7
Yes. Minus 100.
100 divided by 100
Yes.
times 100.
Yes. 36. 36.7, right? So there's been 36.7% inflation from 1982 to 1996. If someone wanted to ask us the rate of inflation over that time period, we'd say 36.7.
Is the CPIY always 100? No, right?
Well, the thing is, the CPY is 100 in the base year.
But if we change it and we have more years involved in it, okay, it could be.
So we could make up numbers.
You could just cancel the hundreds out if it was always 100. Right?
Okay, we could make up numbers for, say, 1997. All right, so we know the CPI in 1996. Let's do that, actually. All right, so 1996, CPI is 136.7. All right, so what if our 1997 CPI was, suppose, this basket of goods had increased such that our CPI was now 139. Okay, so that's just 1 year. In 1996, we have a CPI of 136.7. In 1997, we have a CPI of 139. So now how do we calculate the inflation, rate of inflation? Well, we calculate it the same way, except it won't come out to a deceivingly easy number. So it'll be just the difference, our change in original. So 139 minus 136.7 divided by the original year, 136.7, times that whole thing by 100, and that is our annual rate of inflation. You want to have a calculator? Yeah, that's all right.
No.
Let's see what it comes out. Actually, yeah, let's do it. All right.
One number? See if I know what to do.
It's hard on this thing.
I think Luke's going to save us. But not a cell phone, no.
I think it's 1.68.
Mm,
No?
I haven't used this in a long time, and the
Yeah.
batteries are dead.
Oh.
I got the same answer.
Okay.
So
1.68%. A little more than 1.5% inflation from 1996 to 1997. All right.
Professor, the first one.
Yes.
Why was the base year from 1982 100? Why? I'm just.
The base year for 1982 was 100.
I'm just not. Why are we choosing 100 on?
It's arbitrary. We decide where we want the base year to be. We chose 1982 in this example. We could have chosen 1971.
And it would still be 100 if we.
Whatever we choose as the base year, the CPI in that year will be 100. Then we use the CPI to calculate the rate of inflation. And that rate of inflation will be the same no matter what we choose as the base year. Does that make sense? So choosing a base year just helps us visualize, helps us actually do the calculations. We have to choose a base year. And my first thought when I studied this was, well, why can't they just have like the first year where they have data be the base year? And I don't know. I never got in front of any economists to decide these, make these decisions, and never told them that. So they use an arbitrary base year, which is right in the middle of your data. That particular base year, the CPI will be 100.
do they take into account, like, if the government decides to subsidize products? Like the hamburger, for instance. I'm pretty sure the government subsidizes meat.
But they do not Yeah, they do not take that into account. They just
So
measure
that might be
what-
why it's so low, in comparison to the other.
Yeah. They just measure the dollars it costs. Like what value you can get for your dollar is how they estimate inflation. So I guess if the government could subsidize everything, then that would skew the rate of inflation. But that would be pretty much impossible. It'd be pretty difficult to subsidize everything just to mess with the rate of inflation. Hey, Steph.
Yeah. 'Cause I think they subsidize hamburgers.
Yeah. All right, so
So
yeah,
that's why it hasn't doubled or anything.
yeah, that's a great point. So that's the individual product, and that's actually what Luke asked about initially. If the individual product, the price goes up or down or stays the same, in this case, we don't say that's necessarily inflation. We say there are supply and demand or subsidy reasons for that. All right. So quick definition: disinflation just means a reduction in the rate of inflation. So it doesn't mean deflation, it just means a slowing of the rate of inflation. You may hear this term occasionally. You may say we want disinflation. Right? We want the rate of inflation to slow down a little bit. We're not saying we want zero inflation. We're not saying we want deflation, because that could mean the economy is contracting and that would be bad. But we could just handle a little disinflation. All right. So let's take a look at some of the past rates of inflation. On the horizontal axis, we have time starting in 1930 going all the way up to 2015. And we have the inflation rate. 0 is the middle line, and then higher is, of course, inflation. Lower is deflation. So what's going on here, 1930 to 1934? You see we have significant deflation, right? We have the Great Depression. We have companies laying people off. We have no one with any money to spend on products, so there's less demand overall, and prices decrease. We have workers who are willing to work for significantly less, so the wages go down. Then what do we have? And then we have 1935. I guess we have a little inflationary period where there's some government, and I don't remember actually. I think I remember from my American history there were some various government programs in the middle of the Depression, which may have gotten the economy going briefly, but it couldn't sustain. What really ended the Depression was the World War II and the increased demand in military spending, increased production. So, what else do we have? Anyone tell me what else you see in this graph that looks of interest to you? Maybe pick out some of the significant points of inflation or significant points of deflation.
I guess 2000 went down.
Yeah, 2000. This one?
No, to the right of that.
This one. Yeah.
Yeah.
This guy here? Yeah, what happened there?
2009.
Yeah, this is 2009. And we have very slight deflation. So prices went down into. Did anyone notice that? Anyone notice that your dollar was going a little bit further in 2009 than it had gone in 2008? Did any of you feel that? No, I didn't notice it.
I remember when I first started working at my job, it was 2007,
Uh-huh.
and people, there's no jobs, there's nowhere else to go. We have to stay here. It's too bad if they don't pay us a lot. We just have to stay. But now it's totally different. They're hiring and
Uh-huh.
changing, and people are leaving. I see a big difference there.
Right, okay.
That
So
was around that time.
yeah. Okay. All right. So we've got a little deflation during the Great Recession. Now, I think we talked about this time period last time, 1975, 1982, 3. We had these oil shocks. Remember we talked about price of oil drastically went up when OPEC said we're not going to provide oil because we're making some sort of statement.
There's high interest rates during those times too. I mean, 14% interest rates
Mhm.
in the early 80s.
What was driving those interest rates? Was it was cost of input materials, cost of goods, or was it monetary policy, which we'll get into later in the course?
And I don't think it was monetary policy. I think it may have been related to follow-up of the oil.
Okay, so we had a number of things going on. One, the only thing we'll discuss tonight is potential cost of oil, cost of a very important resource in production of so many different things. When the cost of that input increases drastically, well, it's just the cost of producing something increases. So for me to manufacture this cup, I need various things. And I do need oil to transport things, to run my factory, to do various other things associated with that. So because the cost of oil just drastically shoots up, I'm going to have to charge you an extra penny for this cup. And, say nothing of the cup of coffee inside. I'm going to charge you an extra nickel or something for that because of all the things that go into making that. All right. So let's look at some annual inflation rates in selected countries. United States in 2013 had a solid inflation rate of 1.5. This is considered just a good, stable, healthy rate of inflation. If your economy is growing, people are at full employment, they'll be spending money, they'll start to spend more money, prices go up just a little bit, but you keep it under control, and we'll talk about ways they do that with monetary policy in a couple of weeks. Japan had a very tiny rate of inflation. Some might look at that and say, well, Japan's economy could be growing more. There might be too much restriction on what's going on with production, that we need a little bit more encouragement from the government to grow this economy, but it's just there's such concern potentially about inflation, which Japanese are successfully keeping inflation low, but they may be sacrificing growth as a result of that. And of course, what we desperately do not want to be is the country with 40% inflation. So what does that mean? All right, if we've got $1 million in the bank, we worked our whole lives, that's our whole retirement. We keep it in the bank, then we have 40% inflation during the year where we're saving our money or we're keeping it in the bank. We're able to buy much, much less with that $1 million at the end of just 1 year. And imagine if we keep it in the bank for 5 years or 10 years. It's like we had $1 million and we still have $1 million, but I used to be able to buy a house with that. Now I can just buy a car with that. Something crazy like that. All right. So inflation effects, a general rise in prices will decrease the value of income. So if you're in an extremely high inflationary environment, the income that you have will be worth less than it is, or less than it was before this inflationary period. And that brings us to,
Actually, just going back to
Yeah.
Venezuela having such a high inflation rate, I spoke to a friend of mine who's from there, and he would say that you can fill up your car with like $2, but to go buy just like a bottle of water, it's like $10 for one bottle of water.
So the price of gas is significantly low?
Yeah, though they're huge on what. But
Okay.
yeah, you can fill up your car with $2. You want some water, it's $10.
Wow.
It's ridiculous.
Okay,
And I'm
so
like,
it's
you gotta be kidding me. So now it's like that. Wow.
Yeah.
In Ecuador, they say it's like that, where you can't buy clothes, but you can buy food. Food is nothing. It doesn't cost anything. But clothes, they're always asking for stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very expensive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it just wreaks havoc on your economy. Even though some stuff may be affordable, if you have a drastic rate of inflation, how do you manage economic growth? Do you try to put the brakes on that? Well, we'll talk about monetary policy in a couple of weeks, and we'll see that there's some tough ways to approach that. But bottom line is you would prefer less inflation because it decreases the value of your income. And that brings us to a couple points, which you've heard these terms before. Nominal income and real income. What is the difference between those two things? Nominal. What's nominal income? Numbers. All right, it's the actual, Bank of America says they're going to pay you $95,000. That's how much they're going to pay. That's nominal income. But what's your real income? 2 years later.
Adjusted for inflation.
Adjusted for inflation. Exactly.
What about taxes? Do we care?
Well, taxes, we care about paying taxes. We personally would rather not pay them. but in terms of real income and nominal income, we won't factor in for taxes. Real income just gives us a way of relating how much money we're making today, how much money someone else was making 35 years ago. And because there's some inflation, of course, the actual number, the nominal number we're going to make compared to the person 35 years ago is going to be much higher. But in terms of real income, are we really making more, or do we have a better quality of life because of what we're able to purchase with that? Well, real income gives us an apples to apples comparison.
Can you figure that out for your own self? Like year to year, the CPI is going up.
Yeah.
Your income should go up
Yeah.
more.
Yeah, so you'd have to have a base year. You could have that be the year that you start. You started in 2010, $95,000, and you see the rate of inflation. We'll say $100,000. 2010. The rate of inflation in the next year was 3%, and you got an increase of 1%. So what happened to your real income?
So you can argue with the both. I have to find out what the rate of inflation is this year.
Yeah. Well, you can look at the CPI. Yeah. So your rate of your real income went down because inflation went up 3%, and your nominal income only went up 1%. So yeah, tell your boss it's time for a cost of living raise, at least. All right, and we can calculate this using the CPI. Well, what's our nominal income? That $100,000 we're making. How many baskets of typical goods are we able to buy? Well, in last year we were able to buy whatever it was, 700, a certain number, and that was our real income. But as the CPI gets higher and higher, that decreases our real income. And that's the calculation. Our real income is we take our nominal income divided by the CPI. And I guess we do this as a decimal. I think there's one or two calculations on your quiz, but there won't be anything that's confusing. It'll be something straightforward. All right. So percentage change in real income line is our percentage change in nominal income minus our percentage change in the CPI. So back to that previous example, if your nominal income went up 1%, but the change in CPI was 3%, what was the percentage change in your real income? 2. That's pretty optimistic. But it's not 2. It's close though. Negative 2. Exactly. Does that make sense? All right. Oh, this is a fun one. So let's do this calculation really quick. So Babe Ruth earned $80,000 in 1932. How much did he earn in 2009 dollars? So let's just, how would we calculate this real income for Babe Ruth? So let's take his salary in the previous year, which is going to be 1932, and we're going to multiply it by the CPI in 2009, and we're going to divide that by the CPI in 1932. So now the base year is somewhere in between here. That's where the base year gets a little confusing. Like say the base year was 1970. All right, and then 2009, the CPI, the basket of goods cost $218.10. In 1932, that same basket of goods cost $13.70. And I guess it's cut off on the back here, but you can see the salary in 2010 was $1.273 million. Yes, question.
Now, is that something you look up in that given year? Because the previous slide, we calculated it, and then this one, like, the numbers given.
Yeah. So this is the CPI that's given. So we know how to calculate.
So you're given. All right, you're solving for X then.
Yes, we're given the CPI, so we know the rate of inflation.
Okay.
We could actually calculate that rate of inflation too. Yeah. All right. Yes, question.
Actually, I went online this afternoon, and there's a chart you can get that has the CPI in any given year, and all you do is put in the year of income you have and how much you made, and compare it to 2016, and it can give you what current value is.
Oh, it's a website.
Send us the link.
Yeah.
It's
Send the link, or send me the link, and I'll post that on Blackboard. It's do you remember the name of the website?
I just looked up CPI indexes,
Okay.
and so that rolled up. There was this chart that you can compute it. All you have to do is put the amount of money and the year.
Okay. Fantastic. We can compare ourselves to how much. I don't know. How much did George Washington get paid to be president in 1790,
Right.
whatever it was.
That's true.
Yeah. All right. Fantastic. Decline in real income. If the rate of inflation is greater than the rate of nominal income, the rate of inflation is greater than the rate of nominal income increase. All right. This is the example we went through with Lonnie, where she had a decline in real income because her income increased 1% and the inflation rate was 3%, so her real income went down 2%. And then I think the last thing we want to talk about before we get off inflation is nominal interest rate and real interest rate. So if you're in an inflationary environment, how does that affect your decision to invest money in a bank? So you're experiencing inflation. How does that factor into putting money into a bank account? So suppose a bank is offering a healthy interest rate of 4% per year. So you're going to put your money in a bank at $100, and you're going to have $104 at the end of the year, and then it's just going to grow from there. 4% per year. Sounds okay, right? And you want a little interest, a little something for your money, savings, increase as you're saving for your kids' college. Okay, now here's the thing. What if the rate of inflation is 5%?
Ooh.
No. What happens then? What do you say?
Because it's over your interest rate that you're receiving. So you're going to lose money.
You're going to lose money. Does that make sense? So when you take that money out, it's going to be nominally more because you're going to get 4% each year. But the value of that money, you're going to be able to buy less. You will have lost real value because the rate of inflation was higher than the interest rate. Does that make sense?
What if you're trying to watch the cycle? So you expect that it's hot, inflation's high now, it might go down.
Okay.
And then it might be a good move.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So inflation is high now, 5%. All of a sudden, we experience a decrease in inflation. It goes down to 1%. You're making 3% on your money. Then that's a good thing. Absolutely. So bankers calculate that. They think, oh, are we going to lose out on this deal? if the rate of inflation decreases? Absolutely. Question.
Yeah, actually, I think the interest rates these days are around 1%, and that's not a bad thing. Well, that's not a good thing, but I think Japan right now is charging people for making bank deposits. So you're not only making any money for them to keep your money,
You have to pay them.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so there's further erosion
Yeah.
of your resources.
Yeah, so let's go back to this chart. Look at Japan's rate of inflation. So they have a very small rate of inflation. So you might say they would only have to entice you with a very small interest rate. So maybe like 1%. So at the end of a year, you've increased your dollars by 1%. You've lost a little bit in inflation, but you're on the net positive. Right? You've gained a little bit by increasing the value in real terms of your dollars. That's if you're getting 1%. But what if you're paying them 2%? So I guess
Negative.
yeah, you're getting negative.
In your house and just
Negative
run
interest.
that way.
Yeah. So I guess you can do that if the inflation rates are so low in Japan, and you need a safe place to park your money. All right. So we've got nominal interest rate, the actual rate of interest without adjustment for inflation. Suppose it is the banks offer you 4%. All right. Real interest rate, the nominal rate of interest minus the inflation rate. And we said, well, what if inflation rate is 5%? All right. What's the real interest rate then? All right. The bank's nominal interest rate is 4%. Rate of inflation is 5%. What's the real interest rate? Minus 1. Minus 1%. All right. So don't park your money there. All right, two types of inflation Lonnie asked about earlier. First is demand pull. The second is cost push. Let's see if we can figure this out without going to the slides. What might be demand pull inflation? I'll give you
More population.
more population. Yeah, that could be the root cause of it. But what's the next step?
People want more, they're going to pay more.
Yes, yeah. So you have higher population, people want more, people are buying more, so you all are going out spending your money, and all those dollars chasing the same amount of goods increases the cost of those goods. The price goes up a little bit because you all are spending more money. Fantastic. How about cost push?
Costs too much, don't want to buy.
No, not really. People still buy it. They have to. I mean, it's not just the price of any one good; it's the price of every good. Luke,
Changing the prices.
why is there a change in the prices? Both of these result in the price going up. The CPI goes up a little bit.
Maybe on the supply side.
Yes, yeah. Remember,
Suppliers influence the cost by pushing out more production or less production.
yeah,
Maybe. I'm
Yeah.
guessing.
yeah, absolutely right. The key is that it costs them more to produce. I gave the example earlier. If price of oil goes up, I may have to spend a little bit more getting the materials to make this cup of coffee. I may need to, plastic, the machinery to run that takes oil. So if the cost of an input increases, then that's going to push prices up. So, and we'll revisit these when we get to the next chapter. Demand pull is people buying more, driving the prices up. Cost push is the cost of an input increases, cost goes up from the supply side, as Luke said. Demand pull, rise in the general price level resulting from excess of total spending. Demand. When does demand pull inflation occur? When the economy is operating at or near full employment. So full employment is a good thing. That means lots of people are working. It means we don't have any cyclical unemployment. We may just have a little structural unemployment or frictional unemployment where people are between jobs, a little structural unemployment where people are going back to school, getting trained for different jobs. But we are at full employment because we don't have any cyclical unemployment. And when the economy is at or near full employment, we have mild demand pull inflation. Cost push, a rise in the general price level resulting from an increase in the cost of production. I use the oil example. What causes cost push inflation? Cost of labor, raw materials, construction equipment, cost of borrowing, that sort of thing. All right, last little concept, I believe, before we move on, is wage price spiral. What might we mean by a wage price spiral as it has to do with inflation? All right, well, we've got wages, which you pay people to work, do labor. And we've got the price we charge for the goods those workers produce. And we've got the word spiral mixed in there. So, meaning those two things are combining to either drastically increase or drastically decrease. So, what if I have to pay you all a little bit more to produce my product, and then because I have to pay you a little bit more, I'm going to increase the price, and then the same people that I'm paying more to produce, they're having to pay a little bit more for the product, and now they want even more money to do the job, and it gets into a spiral that way. Wage price spiral. The cost goes up, the cost of the labor goes up, the price goes up a little bit, then the labor goes up more, price goes up a little, the cost goes up a little bit more. All right, any questions on that? We won't talk too much about that. I just wanted you to have an understanding of that as we talked a little bit about hyperinflation and a little bit about how these things can get out of hand. All right. So aggregate supply and demand. All right, so this is a fun way to put inflation into practice, and also it will be a combination of things that we've discussed in previous sections. So we'll look at how to use the aggregate demand and supply model to explain business cycle. Okay, so let's see, how am I doing this? Aggregate demand. I'm going to go through aggregate demand, and then I'm going to go through aggregate supply, and then we're going to talk about equilibrium. Okay, so this is, and hopefully you can see this on your slides, but this in this projector just gets cut off a little bit. This is our aggregate demand curve. On the vertical axis, we have the price level measured in CPI, and on the horizontal axis, we have real GDP in trillions of dollars per year. And this is similar from this demand curve that we saw in class 1. The difference is the demand curve we saw in class 1 was just one product. And it was easy to understand that as the price of one product went down, people would want more of it. As the price of one product went up, people would want less of it. Possibly and often because if the price of one product goes up, people can just walk across the street and buy a substitute product. Aggregate demand is a little bit different than that because as the price goes up, this represents the price of everything going up. So you can't walk across the street and buy a substitute product. So aggregate demand is slightly different that way, but it still follows many of the same principles. Some of the things we talk about and why it is downward sloping to the right will be the same concepts as a regular supply-demand curve, but we just realize that it's different because it's everything, it's aggregate demand, and also because it's everything changing in price at the same time. All right. So this curve shows the level of real GDP purchased by consumers, businesses, governments, and foreigners, net exports, at different possible price levels during a time period. All right. The vertical axis, as we mentioned, is the price measured in CPI. The horizontal axis, as we mentioned, is the value of final goods and services measured by real GDP. Now, as we get a decrease in price level, it follows some of the same principles, but they're explained a little bit differently. So I'm going to come back to this. I'm going to talk about why it slopes downward to the right. I'm going to talk about the real balances effect, the interest rate effect, and the net exports effect. So let me just go back to my graph. Now I'm going to talk about those. I'm going to talk about those three things. And they may sound familiar, but let's just look at them in a slightly different light, with aggregate demand rather than demand. So real balances effect is just the concept that as the price level goes down, you get more for your money. As the price of this basket of goods goes down, you get more value out of it. So price of everything goes down. Now I can spend a little bit more on gasoline because it'll take me a little bit further. I can see, I can go on longer trips. I may want to go out to a movie because I can see 2 movies a week. Last year I could only see 1 movie a week. So as the price goes down, you get more value, you get more benefit. So we understand why you would want to buy more quantity. That's a real balance effect, and that's very similar to what we saw when we looked at individual supply and demand. The savings, what's called the savings effect? Yeah, it's the interest rate effect, right? Interest rate effect, okay. So the interest rate effect is that as the price level goes up, people will borrow more money to buy these products. The higher the price level, the increased need for borrowing. Now, we didn't really look at this when we looked at individual demand, but when we're looking at everything a consumer spends, everything a consumer buys, borrowing may be a factor. So the higher the price level, the more borrowing that happens. And this is a warm-up for our monetary policy, but let me just throw this question out. When more people want to borrow money, what do you think happens to the interest rate? Goes up, right? Everybody wants to borrow money, so the bankers can charge a higher interest rate. So the more the price goes up, the more people want to borrow, and the higher interest rate there is. So as there's a higher interest rate, do you think that makes people less inclined to borrow or more inclined to borrow? Lonnie? Less. Right. So higher price means higher interest rate means less inclined to borrow. So as the price level goes up of this basket of goods, we have a decrease in demand because of that interest rate effect. Does that make sense? Are you with me, Luke? Higher price, higher interest rate, less inclined to borrow. People say, I'm not going to buy that car. I have to pay 24% interest. I'm not a desperate 19-year-old. I'm going to wait. I'm going to ride the bus. All right, so we've got real balances effect. We've got interest rate effect. We've got the third one. It's export effect. How do you say it? How's it go?
Net export effect?
Net export effect. Okay. Now this one is a little bit of the substitution effect. So this GDP is within our economy. Suppose it's the United States economy. So if the prices in the United States economy go up, What if the prices in Japan or the prices in China, what if they're going down? Well, in those cases, we can substitute. We don't substitute individual products as we talked about, but we can substitute with exports. So we can buy more from China, we can buy more from Japan. The more our price goes up, the more we are inclined to do that. So price goes up, demand for the US products goes down, and demand for Chinese, Japanese, Indian export products or imports go up. So our demand for imports goes up. The higher prices are at home. And the higher our prices are at home, the less demand foreigners have for our goods. Make sense? Okay. So let me make sure I said all those correctly. We talked about real balances effect, which is very similar to our supply-demand concept we talked about in class 1. We talked about interest rate effect, which is important for you to know, if for no other reason than this is an important warm-up for our monetary policy discussion that's coming in a week or two. And then the net export effect is a little bit of the substitution effect. As our prices go up, we're going to have more demand for our products in other markets. All right, so we've got a definition of the real balances effect, all written for you on the slide. We've got a definition of the interest rate effect, written for you on the next slide. And we've got a definition of the net exports effect, written for you on the next slide. Any questions about those three? Okay, and we've got a summation of what happens with each of those three and how they affect aggregate demand, movement along that aggregate demand curve. All right, now thus far, we've just been talking about movement along the aggregate demand curve. And this may sound familiar from class 1. We said, all right, price changes, we have movement along the aggregate demand curve for those three things: interest rate effects, real balances effect, net exports effect. But we can also have shifts in the aggregate demand curve. The same way we can have shifts in an individual product's demand curve. Does anyone know, can anyone guess how and why we would have a shift in the aggregate demand curve? All right, if I don't get any volunteers, I'll give you a hint, and then I'll just keep giving you more hints.
Would it be the change in the imports or exports?
Yeah, that's one reason. Okay, so change in the imports or exports. So exports, minus imports, whatever it is. Imports is in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Exports is in. All right, change. So we start exporting more, and we have a shift to the right. Increase our GDP. All right, if our markets are now our goods are more attractive in another market, then we have a change. What else could cause a shift?
Change in investments.
Yes, investments. Change in investments. What else?
Consumption.
Consumption. Yes. What else?
Government.
Government. Yes. All right. So I really like getting to this
It's
point.
looking a lot like GDP.
What's that?
Looks a lot like GDP, right?
Yeah. So this is GDP.
Like, isn't that the equation?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yes.
Just so I'm not dumb. Okay. Thank you.
It's the changes in any of these factors will increase GDP, and this is essentially a shift in aggregate demand. And I like getting to this point in economics because it's so simple. We can look at these concepts that we're familiar with, say, well, what do we need to do to get this economy going? All right, we're at a White House briefing. What do we do to get this economy going? Believe me, they don't get much more complicated than this. No, I'm just guessing. I've never been in the White House.
Increased government spending.
Yes.
Stimulus
They
packages.
say increase government spending. All right, stimulus package.
Bailouts.
Yeah,
Same
let's
thing.
let's fuel the economy by injecting more money in the economy. And then they'll say, well, thank God those tax and spend liberals are gone, so we're not going to do that. What are we going to do? All right, we're
Change consumption.
going to change consumption. All right, how are we going to change consumption? We're going to encourage people to buy more. We're going to say you should go out and buy more. Does anyone remember that tax rebate we got from George W. Bush in I think 2001, 2002? Is any of you paying taxes at that point? I think I got like
If I got it, I didn't know.
I got like $300-400 from George W. Bush, personally from him. And, he said, you should take that money, go out and build yourself a nice patio in your backyard. All right, spend that money at Ace Hardware, buy yourself a case of beer, have a drink on me.
Doesn't
Alright.
raise the GDP if you build your own patio, right?
Oh, well, you could buy the materials. You know what? Good point. You should hire someone to build your patio. All right, let's get the economy stimulated that way. Investment. All right, let's think about making the economy more business friendly, perhaps. Let's give tax incentives to companies who are going to build a new factory here. Let's try to get that virtuous cycle going. And then, of course, we talked about government spending, and that'll be an important part of our discussion in a little bit about how we might get out of a recession. Imports, exports. All right, so how do we win that trade war? Anyone here in the debate the other night? Are there a lot? What's that?
Tax imports.
Yes, tax imports. All right, if only we could just tax imports and there would be no retribution. We tax imports and then they won't tax our exports, right? Right? No? Okay.
People have to choose to buy things made in the USA.
Start a Buy American campaign?
Actually, isn't that why in food they do high fructose corn syrup? Because sugar has a very high tax.
Yeah, something that sounds familiar. Anyone remember that?
I guess that would be considered a substitute.
They use, like if you buy a can of Coke in Europe, it has real sugar in it,
Yeah,
but it doesn't have it.
because of like some kind of like tariff on
And
sugar.
is it the agricultural lobby in the United States?
Yeah, I don't know if it's
Sugar
an
lobby.
import coming in or they tax it.
The American
Yes,
Sugar Lobby?
American Sugar Lobby. Right.
So what they say, the American Sugar Lobby says you have to buy American, and they do.
American.
You have to buy American, and otherwise we're gonna tax, so we're gonna do all sorts of stuff. And then Coke says, we're not gonna pay that bloated sugar for American sugar
That's why
because
the soda is like high fructose corn syrup. instead of
Yeah. and because we use so much sugar. You know how much sugar is in a can of Coke?
sugar.
It's
41
crazy.
grams. I don't know.
It's crazy. So
a lot.
they spend so much on sugar, they would have to spend a lot more if they were buying that American-made sugar. Okay, we could build a wall and get Mexico to pay for it. Right? That's one thing we could do. All right, we're losing the trade war with Mexico. I don't know if you heard Trump in the debate. There were a lot of things happened in that debate, but the last one, he said, we're at an $800 billion trade deficit. All right, we're losing this. And he said we need someone with money, someone with good sense to fix that for us. And it's hard. You have to. These are individual consumers who are acting in their own interests. Same thing with products that are coming from other countries, products that are coming from Mexico. There's no one central person making these decisions. It's all of us, all of our individual consumers adding up to that trade deficit.
I was looking on eBay last night because we're getting ready for my baby's first birthday, and for decorations and stuff. The things that are coming from China are like 10 times less expensive with shipping
Yeah,
than everything else.
yeah.
Like really cheap.
Yeah, and it increases our quality of life. We get 10 times as much. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but if we're in the American government and we want to think about how we can grow the economy, we need to, of course, balance those things.
I didn't buy them.
You didn't buy them? Well, good for you, I guess. I don't know. I buy lots of buy lots of stuff on Amazon, and a lot of stuff I buy on Amazon comes from China. And sometimes it'll take
Amazon's okay if you have Prime and then you know it'll come.
But sometimes if you buy
It takes months.
yeah, some of you.
That's why.
Yeah, I remember buying a number of things from China that took like 3 weeks or a month, and then I accidentally ordered like 5 watches instead of 1. But they were only like $3.
Try to ship that back, huh?
Well, I tried to like say, can I send these back? And he's like, well, and then somebody emailed me back, well, sure, send them to China. I'll give you your refund. So I'm like, okay. We had a couple exchanges because I was annoyed by the first email I got, and then whoever was writing this just would not let up. Like, yeah, send five watches to China. I'll give you 5 watch credit. All right. So these stimulating aggregate demand can come down to these things, which you already know. And we've already had a good discussion about how we might go about a decision process of deciding what to do. And yes, it is this simple. Yes, this is what drives our economy. When you hear about a contraction, a recession, an expansion, every economic business cycle ever has been studied in these 4 terms in this aggregate demand curve by some economist at some point. And you now understand those fundamentals. Congratulations. So let's put this together with our aggregate supply and think about how that affects overall production in the economy. All right, this is, we know we've got the real balances effect. What did I do? I went ahead. Yes. Okay, yeah, now we're talking about increasing the aggregate demand curve is increase in these 4 things. Decreasing the aggregate demand curve would be a decrease in these 4 things. All right, if we're going from point A to point B, we've got a big government stimulus. Or we've got that check from George W. Bush, where we increase spending as a result. Or we've got better tax incentives for companies, where the companies say, okay, I'm going to invest in the new factory. So we have a shift in aggregate demand. Aggregate supply. All right, so we have aggregate demand, this curve, which we know, and we're going to pose on that the aggregate supply, which is similar to the supply curve we studied in class 1, but it's everything. All the supply, all the factors of production, all the products we sell, all put into one curve. And that's going to give us just a big picture of how we can monitor progress in the economy. So this is a curve that shows the level of real GDP produced at different price levels during different time periods. There are 2 opposing theories that we're going to discuss about the aggregate supply curve, the Keynesian view and the classical view. So let me give you an overview of those 2 views. So first, let me just say, we'll think of a price level. We'll have a price level on the vertical axis. We'll have GDP on the horizontal axis, and it will tend to slope the same way we think of a supply curve sloping that we learned in class 1. But there are a couple of interesting things. One thing that is very important in the aggregate supply curve is that a huge component of aggregate supply is labor. Right? The cost of wages to produce products. And we looked a little bit at labor, I think, when we were in class 2 or 3. But labor is a key component, a key driving factor in how this curve breaks. Okay, so in determining the overall price level in the economy, we put aggregate supply with aggregate demand, and that's voila, our equilibrium price level. All right, in terms of these 2 competing views, we're going to talk about the Keynesian view, and we're going to talk about the classical view. Now, the classical view, I'll start with that one. classical view makes the assumption, has the theory that when we're operating at full employment, we essentially can't produce any more GDP than that. Because full employment means everyone is working. Everyone except a few people who are between jobs, a few people are going back to school for retraining. Everyone is working, all the factories are running at optimal average levels. So we ultimately face a vertical line for aggregate supply. This doesn't matter how much the price level increases, we just can't really produce any more than that. So that will be important if we look at a classical model of aggregate supply and what happens and how price level reaches an equilibrium. So that's classical. We face a vertical aggregate supply curve. The Keynesian range says, well, there are some points when we face a horizontal aggregate supply curve. And the reason for that is, well, during a recession, there are reasons which stop prices from decreasing and stop prices from increasing as well. And Keynes, he was a guy who wrote in the middle of the Depression. He saw how the Depression was affecting the economy. He saw a lot of unemployed workers around him, but yet at the same time, he saw people who weren't unemployed and who were still making decent wages. And those people who were working were still buying products at a relatively similar price level. And he said there are a couple reasons why he thinks the price levels and wages will not go down during a recession. That would be minimum wage laws and union contracts, primarily. So even during a recession, so as if we can imagine the aggregate demand curve shifting further and further to the left, as consumers are decreasing their spending, there's less investment, less government spending, we're losing the trade war, that prices will not necessarily go down because of union contracts or minimum wage laws. Similarly, prices will not go up because there's a lot of people unemployed, a lot of people who are willing to work, fighting for jobs. So they will keep the price levels low. And there will also be an abundant supply of products. As people are less able to spend, there won't be this run on products which would drive the price down. So those are just the two pieces I want you to at least just kind of get a feel for. The Keynesian region, as we get to the left side of the aggregate supply curve, and we're talking about a recession, like lower GDP, Keynes says that the prices don't go down because of labor contracts and minimum wage laws, and they don't go up for what we would think of as obvious reasons. When everyone's out of a job, then prices will not go up. Now we also want to understand the rationale behind the classic range of the aggregate supply curve, which is at full employment, an economy really can't produce that much more, even if demand continues to increase. And then, of course, there's an intermediate range where some of the things you would expect would happen. When we have more demand, price will go up a little bit. When we have less demand, price will go down a little bit. All right, what I want to do now is I want to explain in a little more detail the classic range, and then we'll take a break. And then we'll come back and we'll revisit that. But I want to put this classic range idea in your head before we break. All right. Now remember, classical economists claim that the aggregate supply curve is vertical. Why do they claim that?
Full employment.
Full employment, all right? If there's more demand, we can't really help you. We can't produce more. If there's less demand, well, we still have the same number of people who want jobs. We still have the same number of factories who want to try to produce all these products. So classical economists say there's a vertical aggregate supply curve. So if we are at this dotted line, and all of a sudden there is a shift in aggregate demand. And why might there be a shift in aggregate demand? One of these reasons, perhaps. Consumer spending goes down, investment goes down, government spending goes down, we start losing the trade battle. So we have a decrease in demand. Alright, so what happens when we have a decrease in demand? We have, one, a bunch of products that are not being sold, and we also have a bunch of unemployed workers. Because demand for our products and services is here, supply for our products and services here. So we have a surplus. Alright, so what happens to equilibrium when we have that surplus? Take a look at the graph and tell me what you see happen. What's that?
It goes down.
Price goes down, right? All right, price goes down, and what else happens? So, what's the employment level here? And what's the employment in GDP here? I guess it's not terribly clear because this is just as GDP. But when there's this decrease in demand, one, our GDP goes down, and that represents a lot of people out of work. We're at less than full employment. All right, but because we face a vertical supply curve, the economy will quickly correct itself with a decrease in price. And we get back to full employment, and we get back to our initial level of GDP. The only thing is, the workers are being paid a little bit less. But also, the workers are paying less for goods and services because the overall price in the economy has gone down. So the key here is that under the classical model, the economy corrects itself fairly quickly in the event of a recession. So demand goes down, a new equilibrium, full employment GDP is restored. Question?
Well, I'm having trouble following that because you indicated earlier that these union contracts are not going to let you decrease the what you pay, actually.
Yeah, so there's two competing views. There's the classical view and the Keynesian view. All right, so I just gave you an overview, and I apologize. I realized that may be confusing. I just wanted to give you an overview of the classical range, overview of the Keynesian range. So now we're zeroing in on the classical range and how classical economic thinking revolves around a recession, revolves around a decrease in aggregate demand. So under the classical view, the economy corrects itself very quickly. Does that make sense?
I think it's hard to correct quickly.
Yeah, well, tell me why it corrects quickly under the theory, though.
Because you decrease the price. If you decrease the price, you increase the demand.
Decrease the. Well, price naturally goes down because it settles at this new equilibrium, and as price naturally goes down, two potentially good things happen, which are what?
There's more available goods.
Yeah, there's more available goods, but we want our economy to be bigger. We want our GDP to be bigger. It's not the only measure of health of our economy, but GDP is an important measure of health of our economy. We want it to be bigger, so that's good. GDP is good, but what else is really good?
Full employment.
Full employment. All right, so classical economic thinking. The economy corrects itself quickly in the event of a recession. So we good with that before we move on?
It's a theory, yes.
Yeah, so what we need to remember is the next step, the competing theory of the Keynesian theory. Do we want to get into that now, or you want to take a quick break? Let's take a quick break. Let's come back at 5 after 8.